The world remembers Sparta as a city of warriors. But before the spears, before the phalanx, before Thermopylae, there was a man, a shadow, a phantom who walked the line between mortal and divine. His name was Lycurgus. No marble statue remains to confirm his image. No date of birth, no tomb, no record of death. Some say he never lived. Others whisper he never died. But those who walked in his wake bore his mark on their skin, their bones, their very souls. When Lycurgus returned from exile, Sparta was broken, splintered by greed, consumed by luxury, and ruled by petty men who thought themselves kings. The people quarreled in the streets, the nobles drowned in wine, and the children soft, swollen, useless knew nothing of the fire that forges strength. He said nothing at first. Through the homes of widows and fathers who could no longer remember what it meant to be free, he simply walked. He did not speak of love, but of law, not of pleasure, but of discipline, and not of peace, but of endurance. Through the Agaras choked with merchants, through the temples empty and crumbling, a code sharper than any blade, colder than any shield, he gave it to Sparta like a chalice filled with bitter wine. When he spoke, they listened. He did not offer comfort. He offered purpose. He had journeyed to Delphi, to the navel of the world, where Apollo's breath still lingered in the cracks of the rock. There he had offered a prayer not for wealth, nor glory, but for clarity. At the age of 7, they were ripped from their mother's arms, not with cruelty, but necessity, and thrust into the Agoge, the great furnace of Sparta's soul. For a vision of the city that might rise from the ashes of decay, not to speak but to strike, not to dream but to endure. A boy who cried from pain was not corrected. He was erased. Lycurgus claimed his laws were not his own. To hide his guilt, he let the creature dig its claws into his chest, gnawing at his ribs until he collapsed. Dead, still silent, the elders wept, not for his death, but for the beauty of it. He shattered the walls between rich and poor not by lifting the poor, but by dragging the rich into the dirt beside them. All would eat the same, wear the same, suffer the same. He did not believe in cruelty for its own sake, believed in transformation. That pain was the chisel by which greatness was sculpted. That hunger carved the body into a weapon. That silence taught the voice when it truly mattered. And the god answered. So he returned, armed not with weapons, but with a code. A Spartan man did not marry out of affection, but of function. The strong would mate with the strong, timed like the sowing of wheat to yield children not of sentiment but strength. Others say he still walks, watching from the hills, his cloak as red as blood and as silent as judgment. If a man was old and wise, but weak in body, another man might be chosen to give seed to his wife. It was not shameful. It was sacred. People drank. So the daughters of Sparta trained beside the sons, wrestling, sweating under the sun, their thighs thick with power, their backs broad, their voices unbowed. Foreigners called them unnatural, but in Sparta they were called holy. He abolished gold and silver, melted them into crude iron bars, too heavy to hoard, too worthless to steal. Luxury was not stripped, was strangled. He observed the law unfold like a vine wrapping itself around the people, binding them not with chains, but with belief. For that is the truest prison, the one we build in our minds and call it virtue. Then he turned to the children. To raise a Spartan, he said, one must first break the boy. They were starved, beaten, ridiculed, taught not to read poetry, but to steal without being caught. One boy, nameless, like many, was caught stealing a fox from a farm. This was virtue. This was Sparta. And yet Lycurgus was not without contradiction. He redefined even marriage. Love had no place here, and the women. Oh, the women. Lycurgus saw what others feared, that strong men are forged by strong mothers. And through all this he watched. He did not rule. He did not command. When his laws had rooted deep, when no citizen dared sleep with coins beneath his pillow or feast alone by candlelight, Lycurgus gathered the people for one final act, told them he must leave. But he made them swear by Apollo, by the blood of their ancestors, by their unborn sons, that they would never change his laws, not until he returned. He walked away, and he never did return. Some say he starved himself in a foreign land, so his death would bind them forever. But Sparta kept its vow. They became the living monument to a man no one could bury. The death of Lycurgus. It was death at all left, no statue, no tombstone, only silence. And into that silence, Sparta was born again. No kings ruled Sparta alone. Two thrones stood side by side, a dual monarchy, one for war, one for peace. And every child born into Sparta was baptized in this faith. But neither could defy the retra, the law code left behind like a ghostly fingerprint on every soul. Lycurgus had crafted not just rules, but a religion of discipline. His skin, his bones, his breath, all measured against a standard not of compassion, but of calculation. The boy was not a son. He was an offering. At birth, he was lifted before a council of elders not swaddled in blankets, but stripped naked. If he was strong, he lived. If he was weak, he was discarded. There was a cliff outside the city, called the Apothete, where the unworthy were cast. No grave, no name, no mourning. It was only silence. They were not given shoes. Their beds were crafted from reeds torn by hand from the riverbanks. If they failed to collect enough, if they shivered through the night, it was not the cold that punished them, it was the shame. A boy with too many words was suspect. A boy who watched and said nothing was dangerous. From the age of 7, they were no longer children. They were instruments in the making. To eat was necessary. To deceive was noble. But if they were caught, they were beaten, not for the act, but for the failure. To those outside Sparta, it was monstrous. To the Spartans, it was mercy. At age 20, a boy became a man, not by law, but by invitation. Bread, barley, and the infamous black broth, a mixture of blood, vinegar, and boiled pig's flesh. Foreigners gagged at the smell. Spartans said it tasted of strength. To be rejected by a mess group was a fate worse than death. It meant exile, loneliness, shame. Better to die as an infant than to live as a burden. The survivors, those deemed worthy, were fed into the agoge. Only the strongest, those whose bodies were silent and minds sharp, were chosen. They slept in the cold. They wore the same cloak through summer and frost. They were taught to steal food not for survival, but for cunning. Their bodies became lean, like whips of muscle, their eyes silent, watchful, unreadable. They learned to speak only when spoken to. It was trained sharpened into loyalty for the polis and for the brother beside him in the line, to hunt. And that was the goal. To be a helot was to be neither free nor wholly human in the eyes of the state. They outnumbered Spartans 10-1, and so each year the Ephors declared war upon them, but even more feared than failure was softness. Affection was not banned. It was ignored. A boy might remember his mother's face, but he would never speak it aloud. Love was not nurtured. For the most sacred bond in Sparta was not between husband and wife, nor parent and child, but between warriors. The Syestia, the mess hall of men, was where real citizenship began. Each night, the men dined together, not in feast, but in function. And still there was no room for rest. Cryptia awaited. A secret rite of passage, a trial of shadow, and every blade, no matter how perfect, will one day meet a force it cannot cut. At night they vanished into the countryside. No armor, no torch, only a dagger. Their task, but not beasts, its laws still binding. Centuries after his bones, if they ever existed, turned to dust. His voice echoed in every shouted command. In every child taken from its mother, in every helot who dared to stand tall, never stood again. They hunted the helots, the enslaved underclass, who toiled in Sparta's fields and raised its crops, legally, formally, so that murder would not be murder, but maintenance. The Cryptia would move through the villages like shadows, slay the strongest, the boldest, those who looked men in the eye. It was not just to kill, it was to remind. To remind the helots of their place. To remind the young Spartans what it meant to wear the cloak. A blood ritual hidden beneath law and ritual, cloaked in silence. And no one spoke of it. Not in the city. Not in the fields. Not even in the breath between heartbeat and memory. It was as if Sparta itself had to face as one in sunlight, disciplined and noble, the other in shadow, ruthless and unblinking. But both faces bore the same name, order and behind it all, Lycurgus. To be Spartan was to be forged, not born. To suffer and call it strength. To endure and call it life? But every fire leaves ash. The machine ran perfectly until it didn't. Sparta, forged in fire and silence, had grown into a kingdom of fearsome warriors, revered and reviled across the Hellenic world. Its laws were unbending, its people unyielding. And yet, like a sword honed sharply, Sparta began to cut even itself. The first crack did not appear in battle, it appeared in the soul. The boys who survived the Agoge, who passed the Cryptia, became warriors not of flesh, but of code. They knew no poetry, they wrote no songs. They fathered children not out of love, but duty. Even their wives were not companions, but wombs assigned by the state. Desire had no place in Sparta, nor did dreaming. Even the arts, those ancient comforts of man, were outlawed. The Peloponnesian League was born a web of alliances, of fear more than loyalty. And with it came the Great War, not against Persia, but against Athens. Where Sparta silenced dissent, Athens debated it in the open. Where Sparta buried its past in silence, Athens immortalized it in marble. Lycurgus had seen music as a weakness, philosophy as decay, and so Sparta became a city without theater, without sculpture, without laughter. It was said that a Spartan laughed only once, when he died, and yet death was beginning to lose its meaning. For the first time, Sparta looked outward not for conquest, but for control. Athens, the mirror of everything, Sparta was not. Where Sparta taught obedience, Athens worshipped reason. The old code that no Spartan could own excessive wealth, that all land was shared, faded like breath on a shield, others poorer. A gap formed not between citizen and helot, but between Spartan and Spartan. But the spirit was gone. The two cities were gods of opposing altars, and when they clashed, it was not war. It was judgment. The Peloponnesian War dragged on for nearly 30 years. Sparta won, but it was not a victory, it was a funeral. Tens of thousands dead. The Spartan treasury drained, the helots restless. Even the vaunted discipline began to fray. A generation rose that did not sleep on reeds or steal their food. They spoke more, loved more, hesitated more. For what use is perfection when your enemies no longer fear you and your allies no longer trust you? To rebuild its strength, Sparta did the unthinkable. Epaminondas reformed the battlefield itself, stacking his forces deep on one flank. Hammering the Spartans with a wedge of fury and innovation, it compromised. Foreign gold flowed in. Spartan warriors began to accept luxury soft beds, foreign wives, foreign habits, their hoplites unstoppable, and hesitation was death. It began with whispers in the Sicya. Men once bound by brotherhood now spoke of property, ambition, inheritance. Some grew richer. In Sparta, there was no word more poisonous than difference. The FARs, those 5 elected magistrates who ruled in Lycurgus's name, tried to enforce the retra. They passed new decrees, ordered new purges. Citizenship, once sacred, was now sold. Foreigners were adopted into the ranks. Bastards became kings. The retra had become a relic. Then came Leuctra. The allies rebelled. The helots revolted. 371 BC, the Thebans, once humble allies, now bitter enemies, stood against Sparta's finest. For centuries, the Spartans had never lost a land battle. Their phalanx was legend, but not as Sparta. Hadn't he? But Leuctra broke the myth. The Theban general, the result. Slaughter. No statues, no tomb. Hundreds of Spartan warriors fell, including the royal heir. The unthinkable had happened. Sparta had bled, and the world smelled that blood like wolves on the wind. The empire cracked. Even worse, Sparta's population was dwindling. Fewer and fewer boys completed the Agoge. The laws of Lycurgus, etched in the hearts of warriors for centuries, were now parchment, torn by desperate fingers. Sparta survived, became a ghost of its own legend. A city still speaking the language of war, but with a hoarse and fading voice. And through the dust of its decline, one figure remained untouched. Lycurgus. Even as the buildings crumbled and the phalanx scattered, his legend endured. Like a curse, like a prophecy, he had warned them. No writings, only law, only silence, only obedience. but the question lingered like smoke in the ruins. What happens when a man builds a world so perfect it cannot allow the soul to live? Sparta did not fall in fire, it fell in whispers. No barbarian army sacked it, no tidal wave of empire crushed it. The city simply unraveled. The laws remained etched into memory. But memory fades. Discipline became ritual, ritual became performance. And performance eventually became parody. Senators sent their sons to visit the ruins, marvel at the simplicity, laugh at the rigid absurdity of a city that outlawed gold, outlawed poetry, outlawed love. By the time Rome rose in the West, Sparta was a curiosity. The Spartans had become actors on a stage that no longer had an audience. None of them had walked the path of the Agoge. One name. The Helots no longer feared them. The world no longer remembered them. They dressed in red cloaks. They recited old drills. They told tales of Thermopylae and Plataea. But none of them had fought in wars. Beneath it all there was still one presence, Lycurgus. Some said he never existed. A myth, a symbol. Others swore he walked among them once, tall and gaunt, with eyes like polished obsidian, and a voice that made kings tremble. But no one ever found his grave. He had forbidden it, because Lycurgus knew something the others did not. Statues fall, scrolls burn, names fade, but law outlives flesh. Even as Rome conquered Greece, they could not erase the Spartan code entirely. In every military academy, every doctrine of discipline, every whisper of sacrifice over comfort, his breath lingered. Even today, the world cannot forget him. Without breaking boys, because the question he asked has never been answered. Can you build a perfect society by destroying the self? Can you breed courage without kindness? Can you raise warriors? That freedom is a lie. Lycurgus believed the answer was yes. He believed man must be bent, broken, reshaped into iron. He believed pain was cleansing, that weakness was infection, that love was a trap. But history tells a cruel truth. The strongest walls are not made of stone, but of myth. And when the myth dies, the city dies with it. So now Sparta lies silent. The red cloaks hang in museums. Spears are dull. The children no longer march barefoot. No one sings the war songs. Only the wind passes through the ruins. But somewhere beyond time, beyond history, there is still a shadow walking barefoot through olive groves. He speaks no words, carries no scroll. But wherever men speak of glory without mercy, of strength without soul, of honor without love, there he is listening, the lawgiver, the ghost, the man no one dares to forget, Lycurgus.